Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Voices of Social Work podcast. I'm Anna, a licensed social worker interviewing social workers, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Michelle, founder of MSW Helper. Michelle not only was a social worker herself, but now has transitioned to being a social worker helping social workers with her business that focuses on MSW personal statements and applications. This is such a great episode, hearing Michelle talk about how she got into social work, and also we get to hear some of her expertise in applying for an MSW program. This is definitely one to be excited for, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Michelle Bruxer, and I'm the founder of MSW Helper, where I basically support people who are applying to their Master of Social Work. So kind of a very unique area of social work to be in. I actually started it while I was in grad school, and it was always like a side hustle until and then while I was working as a social worker in the field as well. And over the last year, I've actually that's when I kind of jumped into this full time.
That's so cool. So you started, when did you get the idea of this is what you were going to be doing?
When I was in grad school, I was looking for some additional income. I was looking to start, a bit of a side hustle while I was supporting myself through school. And I actually started editing resumes. And I literally posted on Kijiji, which is the Canadian version of Craigslist. And I would meet anybody and everybody in my school's public library and just edit their resume. And from that, I kind of found this niche with supporting social workers with their resume since I was in grad school. So it kind of made sense for me to use my skills there. From that, I kind of got the idea that, I had just been through that experience of applying to grad school, and I knew how difficult that process was. And there were so few supports for people who are applying to Master of Social Work programs. I remember I went to my school's academic writing center, and I kind of felt like they didn't really understand the nuances of social work and what I thought they would be looking for in the personal statement. So I kind of just threw it out there that, I was available to edit these personal statements and share my perspective and my experience from going through it myself. And this was back in 2018. And it was always just a side hustle for me. It was, I didn't really set out to start a business, but every single year it kind of grew and grew as people learned about what I was doing. And yeah, it was just last year that, I kind of decided to take the leap and pursue it full time.
That's so cool. And it's cool that you were able to find your strengths and what was a way to make money during grad school. And then it fits so perfectly into a gap of things that people
Totally.
need and that really didn't exist.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. As far as I know, I'm the only person who is specifically editing social work resumes. And yeah, it definitely combines my strengths in both social work as well as my writing skills. I've always been a strong writer. So yeah, it's kind of a nice blend of my strengths.
Yeah, your unique toolbox that you can.
Exactly.
That's cool. When did you start doing your business full time? Was it right out of grad school, or did you do anything else in the meantime?
Nope. So after I graduated, I started a full-time job as a social worker. I was working as a case manager for families who had a child with a disability. And then I also worked as a therapist part-time. So the stuff I was doing with the personal statements was always just a side hustle, a couple hours a week supporting people. So I started that in 2018, and it wasn't until fall of last year, so fall of 2022, that I decided I needed to make a change, in what I was doing. I was very busy, and also, wanting to pursue my own thing and pursue my own business. So
Yeah. What was the time when you were starting to do that full time? What was that like, I guess, personally, taking the jump to pursue something that you loved?
a leap of faith.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, and when I basically got to a point, in social work where I was feeling like I really needed a change. I was feeling a little bit, burnt out from the profession, as we sometimes can be. So I quit my job, and I actually didn't really know that I was going to pursue MSW Helper full time at that point even. I
Mhm.
just knew I wanted to work for myself. And I actually had like other business ideas that I wanted to pursue, but at the time I quit my job, it was August of 2022, and I knew the application season was coming up. And so I was like, okay, why don't I just spend the fall like working on this business, because it makes sense. This is like the time of year when people are applying to grad school. And in January, I'll start my real business.
Mhm.
And I was, planning to go into private practice or like, do something more like social worky. And yeah, I got through the fall and it went really well. And I just decided in January, I kept like putting off the other business idea, the private practice. I kept pushing it down. And it kind of got to the point where I was like, you know what? I really think that I have something here, and I really want to see this through and see what happens if I just keep like pursuing it and taking it as far as I can.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I'm sure it was so scary, like in the beginning of being like, okay, how is the future going to look? But it's so awesome that it worked out. And like I said, I think it's probably because you found such a gap. And you are also the only person that I've ever heard of focusing just on social work, which is so important. Like the niche of the field that is social workers helping social workers, I think is an
Yeah.
option that people don't always know about or think about.
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely like a gap. And yeah, I think I'm definitely at an advantage because I'm the only person doing it. And I have so many years of experience doing it too,
Mhm.
right? I've been doing it for so long as a side hustle that, I kind of have the editing piece figured out. And so the last year has just been figuring out the business piece and how to actually like create a real business out of it. But yeah, I realized over the last year that there's so many things that we can do as social workers that might not look as like that isn't as traditional, and especially with like how big the internet is, it's so important to like niche down and really like come up with something that really like speaks to somebody.
Yeah, because I'm sure whenever people Google like help with my MSW personal statement, it's like, oh, hello, MSW.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
That. How did you choose to get into social work? Like back in the beginning, whenever you were deciding to pursue a degree?
Yep. So that was a long time ago for me. That would have been in about 2014.
Mhm.
I did my Bachelor of Social Work, and then my Master of Social Work right after. I always like I when I was younger, I actually didn't know what social work was. Like I had no idea. I did not know the term social worker. And so I always bounced between wanting to be a teacher and wanting to be a psychologist. And, like I knew I wanted to help people, but I never really was solid in either of those areas. Um, like becoming a psychologist, I knew that that was a very competitive field and a lot of schooling.
Mhm.
So, I wasn't too eager to pursue that. And then so I kind of settled on, okay, well, maybe I'll become a teacher. And then I was working when I was in high school, like I took a gap year and I was working at a summer camp. And I realized very quickly that my strength was not leading a group of 25 to 30 kids. My strength was really like seeing that one kid who needed extra support at the summer camp, who maybe had some extra needs, and supporting them. So I really realized, I am more of a one-to-one person. I'm not going to be the person that wants to like lead a group, and that's just more where I naturally lie. And then I literally I think I remember looking through like university pamphlets being like, okay, what the heck am I going to go to school for? And I literally just saw the term social work and I had no idea what it was. And so I Googled it and I was like, oh, well, this kind of sounds something that is up my alley. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, yes, I think this is where I need to be.
That's funny. And it sounds so similar to like my decision too, where it was like you just kind of happen upon it and you're like, yeah, actually, this is it. Like, this is what I
Yeah.
want.
I think a lot of us enter the field that way. And a lot of people pursue social work, not really understanding like the full, like really what social work actually is, right?
Right. Yes. We definitely have coming in very narrow views of like, okay, I've heard about social work and of course child protection or like foster care, sometimes hospitals or schools sometimes, but it is so amazing. And like you're an example of how social work as a degree and as like a toolkit that you get, you can do so many different things. Like your life can look so different while having the same educational background as someone else.
Totally. Yeah. And that's one of the things I love about having a social work degree is that like there are so many places that we can work with so many different people at so many different levels. And we can even like our degree is super marketable too. Like employers love to see a social work degree even in like other industries and stuff too, because we have such good placements that we do and we bring so many like skills to the table.
Yeah, because it's like those soft skills with people, and it's also like problem solving and like yeah, so many
Yeah,
different.
exactly.
Do you find yourself using skills that you learned getting your social work degrees in your current day-to-day life doing MSW Helper?
Definitely, yeah. That's something I think like once you become a social worker, the values of the profession just like become who you are a little bit. Like for example, something that's really important to me is a strengths-based approach. So when I'm editing personal statements, I'm not just ripping people's personal statement apart, right? I'm highlighting the things that they did really well. And I'm saying, wow, you really demonstrated critical thinking skills here. And like, yeah, I always like try to show them their own strengths in the personal statement. And then also meeting people where they're at, right? People come for services who come from so many different backgrounds and experiences. And it's really about like supporting them where they are and like helping them feel more confident about their application and that it's achievable for them to improve their application.
Yeah, no, that's incredible to hear because I'm sure that it would be so possible for you to do like the editing and someone would come away from it feeling like, oh, wow, like I was awful at this before I started. Like I don't know anything, I don't have any experience, but the way that you can use your social work skills to actually like empower people and
Exactly.
point out in them because sometimes it's hard to see our own strengths, but being able to read what they're doing and being like, no, that's so cool that you did this. And that I'm sure sticks with people as they begin their MSWs that they get into.
For sure. I find sometimes that's like the biggest thing that people need is just like knowing that they're on the right track and that they do have the skills and strengths and that they can apply with some confidence, knowing that like, okay, I'm on the right track and I have the skills and this person sees that in me too.
Yeah. What was your degree experience like whenever you're getting your MSW?
I would say overall pretty positive. I went to school in Canada. um, yeah, I kind of picked my program based off of like um just the school that I wanted to go to. And it was a long time ago. So for me to think back is like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
like the program I did was like generalist in nature. So it didn't really have like a specific, I know sometimes there's like clinical focus or macro focus. The one I did was very much like balanced in that way. And I really like that because I didn't really have like a specific area that I wanted to go into as a social worker. So I wanted to be as marketable as possible and pursue as many different areas of social work as I can.
Mine was kind of the same way where I took so many different classes and even taking the classes at the time, I was like, okay, I'm sure I'm never going to use this. And then I get so surprised by how many different things still pop up day to day of like, oh yeah, I did learn that. And like, I did do that one project that one time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I find the most valuable thing for me out of like pursuing social work was probably the placement experiences. I think that is where like learning something in class is one thing, but definitely like getting into the field and having some really awesome placements is where like I would say I did most of my learning.
Yeah. What were your field placements while you were in school?
So while I was in my bachelor of social work, I was in like a community center in a community that was supported by social housing. So people who were rent geared to income, low income housing. So a lot of clients came to us with, housing issues and just a lot of different things that they needed support with. That was an awesome placement because like I said, I wanted to be more of like a generalist.
Mhm.
And like I had a very supportive placement experience where I was able to like work one-on-one with clients, but also kind of do that like meso community events, like being part of the community. And then I even got to do some macro level projects as well. So like grant writing and like advocacy and stuff like that as well. So for my BSW placement, that was an awesome way to just get like a whole bunch of experience in a bunch of different areas.
Yeah.
And then for my master's placement, I did like a clinical placement. So I was doing therapy in like a doctor's office.
Oh, cool. Those sound like such good learning experiences, especially that BSW one where I'm that's what something that I found like in my current position too is like I never know what I'll be doing in a day, like, but whatever someone brings me is what we'll focus on. And
Yeah,
yeah, having the kind of toolbox, little tool skill set to pull from, it challenges you for sure. But I'm sure you came out of that feeling like I can conquer things.
for sure. And I think the biggest thing is I dipped my toes in a whole bunch of different things. And so when it came to applying to jobs, and I was applying to a bunch of different jobs, I was able to just like, oh yeah, I've kind of done a little bit of this, or yeah, I've done a little bit of that. And so I was really able to like stand out because I had like just like a bunch of experience in a bunch of little areas.
That's so cool. Have
Yeah.
you, now that you've like gained more experience and expertise writing personal statements, have you like reread back the one that you used when you applied? And what do you think about
Yep.
it now?
I have, yes. So when I applied, I thought my personal statement was pretty good. You know, I was pretty proud of what I had come up with. And I did get accepted to a couple schools. So, you know, it was obviously okay. But now, 5 years later, looking at my personal statement, there are a lot of things that I would have changed. So that's something I always tell people too, is like, it's so important to have an extra set of eyes from
Mhm.
someone you trust on your personal statement, because you might have blind spots or things that you're missing or didn't consider that you haven't even thought of. So just having somebody to like check that stuff it is so important, especially for those of us who do consider ourselves to be pretty strong writers and we're pretty independent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would have benefited from my own services.
Yeah. And so it's cool that now you get to be that person for other people who are coming in and can give them that extra leg up while they're writing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. What advice do you have for prospective students? And what's kind of funny is I always ask this question, and it's like you work with prospective students like in your
Yeah.
day to day, but what would be, I guess, one or a couple of pieces of advice that you have for people who are thinking about becoming social workers?
So I guess when it comes to applying to your Master of Social Work, the biggest thing that I would recommend is to have a very clear why to anchor your personal statement. Most schools will ask about like you and your experiences and why you want to become a social worker, as well as like a social justice problem and like ethical values and um, uh, like things that social workers can do to solve a social justice issue. So the biggest mistake that I see people make is they just start answering questions without like really thinking through why they want to be a social worker and what they hope to contribute to the field
Mm.
as a whole. So I always recommend that people, instead of like talking about your experience and, you know, regurgitating what you can see in the resume,
Mhm.
really think about your insights. What are the things that you realized? So, like, for example, going back to that summer camp example, when I was, you know, my job duty, what I was doing was supporting children at summer camp and like planning activities. Yeah, those are great activities. My insight was that kids who were attending summer camp who had those extra challenges that needed support didn't have the supports. And so they were getting kicked out of summer camp. And those parents were relying on that summer camp for childcare for the summer. So that caused a huge problem for these families who needed that extra support. So, you know, that's an example of like an insight you might have based off of your experience. Then when you get to the social justice issue, you can talk about the research. Okay, what does the research say about kids who have extra support needs? And how often are they getting kicked out of school? How often are they getting kicked out of other community places where they can't participate? And how is that impacting kids with those support needs as a whole? And then instead of talking about what a social worker can do about it, talk about what you want to do as a social worker to solve that social justice issue. So it really like takes it so much deeper and shows a need for social work in like your area of interest. And like when you position yourself that way, it pretty much makes it a no-brainer that the admissions committee is going to accept you, because it's like, yeah, you're going to fill like a much needed gap in an area that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, no, that is interesting because it's not just, oh, this is an area that social workers currently working can go work and do it. It's like, no, you need me right in this
Exactly.
gap. I'm the only person. You're like that.
Yeah. It's all about marketing yourself.
Right. Interesting. That makes me want to go like read back mine a little bit. I have no idea what I wrote about back in my
Yeah, even mine, like, yeah, there were things, yeah, I don't think I did it as in depth, but yeah, that's like what I'm helping people do, right? Is like take those like just take it a little bit deeper and connect everything. Like all of your questions should be connected back to that why and what you're hoping to do as a social worker.
Yeah, and that's even just a good mental exercise, I feel like, whenever people are like, well, I have no idea like where I want to end up or what I want to do, and thinking to like what in the experience that you have, like what have you seen that you maybe like feel passionate about?
Yeah.
Or there's a gap that you could fill, or like resources that just aren't there. Because I think that happens a lot too, that working in the field, you'll be like, oh, there must be a solution for this. And there's like not yet. So you get to
Yeah.
do that.
For sure. And yeah, I find a lot of people will say like, well, I don't know what I want to do as a social worker. But when you are able to start with your insights, it's like, okay, let's take it back a few steps and just like think about the things that you've experienced and what you, based off of your experience, skills, and strengths, what could you do to fill a gap? It's not like you're necessarily saying like you're committing to this
Right.
thing, but you're showing that, okay, there is a need, and this is something that I could potentially contribute to the field.
And I'm sure even thinking on experiences, even if it wasn't like something you want to do for the rest of your life, but being able to pick out, well, this aspect of it I really enjoyed. And like maybe this aspect I don't want to spend as much time in the future, but kind of paring away those details to help figure out a direction.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like such a good way, like a good starting point for sure.
Yeah, I feel like my brain is being like exercised right now. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Who has inspired you throughout your social work journey?
I made a lot of friends while I was in social, like going through my social work journey. So I think that that's been something that has been really important for me, is making friends in the field and in my program to like support, support each other through school, but also now in our careers, it's like, having people in the field who like understand, what we do, and having ideas to bounce off of, or even just vent, right? Sometimes it's nice to have those friends who understand what you do and you can kind of vent.
Right. You can vent without all the different like disclaimers and explanations of like
Yes.
social work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. And yeah, even just, I'm sure sometimes when you tell people, oh, I'm a social worker, you're met with a lot of very interesting responses.
So interesting.
Yeah, oh, I could never do that. Or,
oh, you're an angel. And I'm like, oh, like it's just
yeah,
a day-to-day job. Like
yeah, for
9 to
sure.
5.
Yeah, it's always funny. When people say, oh, I could never do that. And I'm like, oh, well, I could, I guess. Like, I don't know. I enjoy it.
Right. You're like, well, I guess that's good that you're not then.
To be fair, I understand. I totally understand why people say that, because I always say that to people who are nurses.
Yeah.
I can't deal with like some of the
all they got going on.
Yeah, all they got going on.
Yes.
So yeah, it's funny. But yeah, that's why, yeah, it's been so important for me to have people who I can just like, who get it, who I can just bounce ideas off of, and seeing like we all support each other in our careers, right? And seeing like supporting each other through job interviews and like getting like ideas and inspiration from each other.
Totally. I think community is so, so important.
For sure.
What are some other things that kind of keep you going? I know you mentioned that previously you'd felt burnout at a job, and obviously that's kind of something that we're always fighting away. So what are some things that you do to help yourself out?
I think the biggest thing for me, and I mentioned this earlier, is having options, and like how much like how many options there are with our social work degree. So I think, I went into my last job and it was, it was a good job. Like it was on, overall, but I think for me, it was just that I needed a change.
Mm.
Um, and I am somebody that really loves to do new things and try out new things. And so I think for me, that's why entrepreneurship is like really a good fit for me, because there's always like so many different things to learn and so many different things that you're doing, and there's so many different directions that I can go, right? What I'm doing now might not be what I'm doing in 2 years.
Mm.
So yeah, I think like it just comes down to like knowing what your needs are, because I think that's what was happening, right? I had an unmet need, and that was the need for like change and like variety.
Mhm.
And having control, like a little bit of control over my own schedule too. I think that was kind of the biggest piece for me was, being in a position where like things weren't innovating as fast as I wanted it to, or in a position where like we had like policies in place that where I felt like it didn't really make sense. So yeah, I think for me, like being able to use my degree to find other things to do that like support a lifestyle that I want to live.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that is something that I think is becoming so much more common is like moving through jobs and not staying, at one job for 40 years until retirement. And social work
Yeah.
is such an opportunity to almost have like an entire career change while still using the same skills. And that's something that is unique.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, I'm glad that I don't live in a time where the norm isn't to stay at the same job for 40 years, like a few generations ago.
Right.
um, that would have been hard for me. So yeah, it's nice being able to, yeah, use our skills in so many different ways and get a change of scenery.
Yeah. I guess a question I have is for people who are maybe making a career change like into social work and don't have too much social work experience under their belt, how how do they market themselves to start like a social work degree?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that because that is something that so many people get so stressed out about. And
Mhm.
I totally get it, but it's the same thing. It's all soft skills, right? And being able to show that you have the skills that admissions committees are looking for. So, for example, I had a client recently who he came from the banking industry, and at first glance, you would think, okay, well, banking and social work, like that's not really related. And I think he was providing like financial advice to like people in the bank. And so my first question was, okay, well, okay, like, you know, you obviously got that training and like the best practices and like, here's what you should be doing for financial advice. How did that really work when you were in the field, working with people from so many different like socioeconomic statuses, so many different walks of life? Like, did that traditional advice that you were taught work for everybody? Probably not, right? So you
Mhm.
had to learn to really tailor your advice to meet people where they're at and probably work with people from some very difficult situations, like people's finances. That's like a huge source of pain for a lot of people. And so like, guiding people through that and supporting them with their finances is huge. And then I had another client who came from marketing, and she was like a news reporter in her home country, and we were able to like she was able to identify that she was sick of reporting on social justice issues, so she wanted to become a social worker so that she could be an agent of change and work towards advocating for those social justice issues. So
Yeah.
if you're coming from a different field, it's all about like finding that overlap between what you were doing and what you want to do, or like what wasn't working in your last career and what you are hoping to do as a social worker instead.
It's so amazing to see the connections that you make like that. Because having started whenever you're like, oh, he was in banking, and I'm like, so what's the similarity there? And then the way you explain it, it's like, oh wow, like that makes so
Yeah,
much sense. That's
for
awesome.
sure. And that stuff comes quickly to me, right? Because I've been doing it for so long that I see that's what I do, right? I'm pulling out all the strengths of people from like their past careers, or even like just the different things that they're doing and say, like, you can talk about this. Like, this is great experience.
That's so cool. Where can people find you if they want to follow along on social media or utilize your services?
Yeah, so on TikTok and Instagram, at msw.helper. And my website is mswhelper.com. And that's where I have, you can either work with me directly, but I also have a ton of free resources, like different templates that people can use, blog posts. And throughout the fall, I'm actually doing a weekly webinar every single Tuesday where people can come on. We'll talk about how to write a strong personal statement and answer any questions that they have.
So cool. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for taking the time to share your story and what you're up to.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.